Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lights on Data show. My name is George Firican. I'm so happy to be here with you today and address the topic of stories of preventable data breaches. I have a wonderful guest, Brian Vallelunga, who's the founder and CEO of Doppler, the first secrets management platform for developers. Brian, you've been featured in Forbes 30 Under 30. You're a veteran lead software engineer of Uber and also a serial entrepreneur, right, with multiple exits and a developer at heart. So I feel like everything that you do has that in mind. It has the developer in mind. And that's as a former developer, I'm always happy to hear that. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Yeah, it's amazing to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. Unfortunately, data breaches are really more common than we think. There's a few websites that are tracking this, especially on those publicly disclosed ones. And it ranges in number of like thousands per month of the publicly disclosed ones. I would imagine there's even more that are not disclosed or not even found out yet. That's a challenge. I live in Canada on the west coast here, and recently, a few months ago, we had an incident with London Drugs, which is like this big retailer, and they had a cyber attack. They were closed for a few days. They actually had to shut down the stores. They couldn't open. They couldn't operate. And even now, I think their employees' data and stuff is like they're saying might be on the dark web. And anyhow, so it is affecting the company, it's affecting its customers and employees, and maybe even more than we think. But I'm really interested in hearing some of the stories that you've came across Toyota and Samsung, Nvidia, Twitch, and really maybe talk to us about those data breaches.
Yeah, so I can do a couple of things. I can share a little bit of stories about a couple of these companies. I can talk a little bit about what secrets are. And then I can actually share how. My personal data has been in a number of data breaches, one of the motivations for me to build Doppler. I can share how that's actually been used against me. So to like ground this and show how it's really applicable to everyone listening on this call. So I think the first thing to start off, and this is like a super important point, is like, what are secrets?
Mm.
And for anyone on this call or live stream, a secret is like a password. So you can have a password that can log you into Netflix or your bank account or whatever it may be. Companies have passwords too, and they're typically called secrets. The big difference, though, between a password and a secret is that your password unlocks only your account, right? So if my Facebook password ever gets out, someone can have access to just my Facebook, but that's it. Now, a secret is different because it's a company level secret. It actually grants access to everyone's credentials, everyone's accounts. So if one secret gets out, that could be the entire database of users. And we've seen that time and
Yeah,
time again.
game over.
Uh, yeah, it really is. So it's like literally one key that unlocks a door that unlocks everyone's account. Even if those passwords never got out, that one secret kind of
Mhm.
circumvented all that and unlocked all that data. And so, like a couple that come to mind, Toyota is a good example of this. Toyota suffered a huge data breach. It's actually publicly written about on one of our partners' websites, Get Guardian, and I can share the information afterwards. But like they had 290,000 customers that were impacted by this. And how does it actually happen? These secrets are used by software engineering teams in code to communicate to a service. So again, you can think about it as like you have a database, which is a service, and kind of like how you have that password that unlocks access to your Facebook, you have a secret that unlocks access to that database. And what will happen is that these secrets just get sprawled around the organization. And so they'll sometimes be on people's individual computers. They'll be in code somewhere. They'll be stored away in production infrastructure. They'll just be scattered across the organization. And one of these secrets will eventually get out. And the way
Mhm.
it commonly happens is that it accidentally gets put in code. The code gets open sourced. And then all of a sudden, that secret that's in the code is now available. It's out in the
Mhm.
public for anyone to use. And if they stumble upon it, they have access to it.
Mhm.
And one very scary thing about secrets is that there's typically this like ripple effect where if you get access to one, it gives you enough access into the system to get access to a lot more, right? It's not like the hacker says, oh, I got past the first door. I'm going to stop when there's 20 other doors available to me. And a lot of times, for example, it's not really 20, it's more like 1,000 different doors, right? And
Mhm.
all of them have a lot of scary information in it. And so that's like how it happens is that you have these secrets all over the place. It's typically called secret sprawl. And because of that, the organization isn't able to keep track of them. Imagine if like you're a security person that's running, I don't know, Toyota or some other org, and you're responsible for making sure all the keys to all the locks on the door are kept track of. But with secret sprawl, you really can't do that. You don't know who has access to those secrets, where they are, when they were accessed last, and specifically where they are is really important, because if it's in code and the code gets open sourced, now it's out and available to anyone. Or you could be sending it in an email, and then all of a sudden you add another contractor on to that email chain, and they go through the history and they're like, oh wait, there's a secret 5 emails deep, and maybe that then get exposed out because a contractor doesn't even realize it, or they do something malicious. So there's lots of ways that these secrets can get out, but it all stems from what I consider three problems. And the way you can like address or see if an organization has these problems, if they can't answer these three questions.
What
The
are those?
the first question is, where are all my secrets, right? If you're charged with protecting like the keys to the locks, you have to know where all the keys are, right? It's like
Mm,
a basic principle of security. The second is, do you know who has access to those keys and when they were accessed last? Because if you can't answer that question, again, you can't really protect anything at this point. And then the third big question is, when a breach does happen, and a lot of times you should really be thinking about it as it's not an if, it's a when, right?
mhm.
Because hackers are getting more and more sophisticated every day. And we can talk about that until the show's over if you wanted to. But when that happens, can you stop it? Right? That the hackers are in, they have access to the credentials, they're now taking your customer data. Can you stop that attack? And as you mentioned in your example, that company shut down for a couple of days. And if I don't know much about that story, but if I had to guess, they were doing something called rotation, which is a very fancy way of saying we're going to swap out all the locks. We don't know
Mhm.
which keys have been leaked to the public or who has the keys anymore. So we're just going to say all the keys are invalid and swap out the locks.
Right.
And that usually requires being shut down for a while, which could be a couple of days.
Yeah,
Uh,
sounds probable.
yeah. And just to ground this on like why this actually matters, because I hear data breach left, data breach like all the time. Like there's data breaches going on. Why does it actually matter? And that's because I think there's the most important part is this data is your data. It's my data. It's every person's data. Like at the end of the day, most people, at least in America, trust vendors with a large portion of their lives, right? I trust Uber
Mhm.
for transportation. I trust Instacart for groceries. I trust Venmo for sharing money with friends. Imagine just any of that data got out, or your viewer history on like Chrome, or your YouTube history, or your Twitch history, which actually did happen in the Twitch data breach. That is real people's data, and that data then gets used against you to get more data. And so, a real example, this actually happened very recently. I live in Austin, Texas, and my mom came and visited me, and I took her to some barbecue place. And while we were at the barbecue place, I got this really scary call, and it was someone claiming to be at the Texas Borders and Customs. And they say, "Hey, we're at the Borders and Customs. There's this package that's in your name that has a bunch of illegal drugs and money in it, and we're opening an investigation, and
Wow.
we want to ask you some information to validate that you are who you say you are." And they start listing all this stuff about me, like stuff that shouldn't be public. And it's all the stuff that was in previous data breaches. And what did it
Mhm.
do? It validated in my mind that they are who they say they are. They have
Mhm.
information that only the government or a couple other services would have that would not normally be working with the borders and customs. And so I like all of a sudden I'm like, oh wow, this is very real. And what do you do next when you're being investigated? You give it more information because they're asking for that information. Oh, were you here at this time and that kind of stuff. And it took me like probably 10 to 15 minutes to realize, once the lawyers like got on the call to help me out here, that this was actually a scam. But in that 10 to 15 minutes, they got more information about me that will then probably be used in a later attack. And this is exactly how it happens. And then eventually they get enough information to compromise your bank account. And you wake up one day and you look and your bank account's empty. Or there's some really nasty post about you that like should not be out there, that looks like you or sounds like you. And this is happening to real Americans and just real people all the time. It's not some like infrequent thing that happens once every year. This is
Yeah.
happening
Yeah.
thousands of times a day.
Yeah, it's scary how it can happen to citizens all over the world. And in a way, we're the weakest link as well when it comes to the company, too. It's their gateway into the databases at times. But tell me more about then how this idea of managing those secrets properly came to be.
Yeah, great question. So I think there's a couple of things going back to these three questions. I think this is the root of it all. We need companies to be able to know where all their secrets are so they can protect them. The way you protect them is you have really strong access controls and auditing. So I can say this person has access to this set of secrets, and I can track every time they've used that secret, right?
Hmm.
You have a really strong picture of what's going on with these keys. And then the last thing is making sure that you can quickly stop a breach from happening. And that's usually using rotation. So you swap out the locks.
And that's presumably if you determine the breach, right? In
Yes.
some cases, it can
That's
take
yeah, that's
more
another.
than a year, right? Until you find out that, oh wow, we've actually been breached.
Yeah, and it's not like the movies a lot of times. Like the movies make it seem like it's, oh, we got in and we're going to do this one big data dump and then run
Hmm.
away as quickly as possible. That's not usually how it happens. It's more like it's a trickle effect where they'd be like, oh, we got a little bit of data here. Let's see how much more we can get, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and
Hmm.
a little bit more. And
Hmm.
a year later, they have 100 million records.
But if you do rotate those secrets, then that makes it harder or impossible
Very
to be
hard.
able
Yeah.
to trickle into it.
So I would say the core underlying thing of what makes a really good secrets manager, and I'm not here to like pitch Doppler. Like the goal of this call is not. I see this as like a PSA to anyone who's listening that hey, there's a real problem, and most companies are facing it, and they need to solve it. They don't have to necessarily solve it with Doppler, though I'd love that, but they just need to solve the problem so we can all stop having data
Hmm.
breaches and have a more secure internet that people can genuinely trust. And so I think what makes a really good secrets manager is a couple things. One, they centralize all the secrets in one place with really strong cryptography. They give the company the ability to set up access controls and auditing. So you have a really clear picture of who has access and when did they access those credentials. It's natively integrated in your infrastructure, so you don't have to copy and paste things. Because every time you like work outside of the secrets manager, that's actually it's not just friction like productivity issues. It's actually a security problem. Right now, you've copied this thing into an insecure place and then pasted it potentially maybe even to an insecure place. And so it needs to be like when it changes in the secrets manager, it changes in your infrastructure, and there's no human in the loop. And then the last one is you need to be able to rotate your secrets. And so you mentioned this. So for rotation, swapping out the locks, the ideal way to do this is you set up on a cadence. So like once every 2 weeks, we're going to swap out the locks. So even if there was a data breach, someone got access to this API key or secret or key that grants access to this database, it's only valid for a short period of time, 2 weeks.
Hmm.
So the breach potential is much smaller. And just to
Hmm.
like ground this in like a real conversation, we had a customer, I can't name the name, but I guarantee you everyone on this call has heard of this company's name. I promise you, most of you probably do look at their website from time to time.
Hmm.
And they had a malicious actor in their company. So they had someone that you can, I'm not going to say a spy, but a spy who was in their company and stole all the secrets. And they discovered this. And they decided that the most prudent thing to do would be to rotate or swap out the locks on all of their secrets, which was roughly around 6,000 secrets.
Well,
And funny enough, by the way, 6,000 seems like the magical number that like most orgs have. I don't know why, that really rounds out to that number for some reason. But yeah, there were 6,000 secrets, and it took their security team full time focus on this. So I believe it was like 3 security engineers over 6 months to rotate everything. So even after they detected the breach, there was still a 6 month window where hackers were still in their systems because they didn't want to just do a full like hard reboot of like, shutting everything down for 2 days and then bringing it back up.
hmm.
And that's really scary. And then with a tool like Doppler, we're able to convert that into minutes, right? If that ever happened and we like, even if we, especially if we automatically detect it, they can click a button or if it's manual and then just rotate everything. And it'll be literally in minutes, the whole thing will be done. So we're basically turning like months of time if the worst case happens into like minutes to maybe even an hour max.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
also, I assume also ensuring that nothing was missed, right? Whereas if
yes.
you do it manually, then very likely you could have missed some stuff.
And why is it so hard to rotate these credentials? These credentials are used in production. They're used on your website or in your services. So you can't just turn them off because your website turns off. So you have to
Hmm.
figure out a way of doing this and keeping yourself up while also changing out the locks at the same time. And that's why it gets very tricky. And you can very easily miss a spot. And if you miss a spot and then you swap out the lock, then there's going to be a part that's down. And so what's special about like really powerful secrets managers like Doppler is that we have when you set up Doppler, you connect it directly with your infrastructure. So we like by definition know where all your secrets are and where they should be. And so when we rotate everything, we automatically push that into your infrastructure and restart your services in a
Right.
controlled way with whatever rollout strategy you have. So you don't have downtime. And so you can manage that whole process without downtime and do it exceptionally quickly, which is like very important. If you're bleeding out like from a gunshot wound, you don't want to take 6 months to plug the hole. You want to plug the hole now. That's what matters.
So I wonder with the that frequency of change that you were mentioning, once you do change all the locks, all the secrets, can you still keep track and trace back to maybe those secrets that you then
Yes.
found out were leaked and to find out where that hole would be?
Yeah, exactly. So the way we see it is every single secret has an audit trail associated
Hmm.
with it. And it's actually really two audit trails. There's like the reads and the writes, which is like who has edited this secret. And every time they edit the secret, it creates a version. And then with that version, we have a read audit trail of every time that secret was accessed and by who, on what machine, on what date, for what purpose, with what project in the company it was associated with what environment. Was this for development or was this for production or CI/CD or something else? So we give them a lot of data around every time the secret was read. And okay, if this secret ended up getting out, we know exactly who were the set of people or services that had access to it. And that's really valuable.
So I'm now very curious. So besides Toyota, some of the other companies like Nvidia, Twitch, Samsung, were there like similar cases on how those secrets got out? Did they inadvertently publish some of their code online, and that included some of those secrets without them being aware of?
Yeah, Samsung and Nvidia. I think the article I'm looking at, just because I want to give facts, I don't just want to BS here. They basically had an involuntary like open source leak that happened,
Mm,
and I can share this information afterwards for anyone who's interested in like reading this more in depth. And Twitch, we all know this one. Twitch was a pretty deep dive secret leak where they had 6,000 repositories, and in there was, I believe, 6,600 secrets in the code. So when the code got accidentally leaked, in that code was secrets. And remember, the right way to do it is have these secrets in a secrets manager, and then the code pulls from the secrets manager. So even if the code gets out, you didn't leak any of the keys.
hmm hmm
And that was the big underlying problem. And there's some like really sensitive secrets in there, from my understanding. Like there was like database credentials, S3 buckets, encryption keys, right? Encryption keys are really scary because that allows you to take data that is encrypted and unencrypt it. Recapture information, which can lead to secondary attacks. It had access to messaging systems in there like Slack and Twilio, which is also very scary because Twilio is what you use for 2FA, two-factor authentication for like
Yeah,
logins.
yeah.
There was a lot of downstream implications here outside of just like the initial set of data that was like stolen.
So Brian, I'm curious with Doppler. Does it scan all the available code and identify all these different secrets keys and then
No.
replaces them, or?
Yeah, we don't do that today. I think our kind of view is secret scanning is a pretty well mature space at this point. GitGuardian
Hmm
does this, Trufflehog does this, and a couple others. And our preferred path is to partner with them.
hmm
And really, where we can drive the value is when you do detect a secret from these tools that are partnered up with Doppler, we can quickly put them into Doppler or into a secrets manager. And so, if you think about it, you have two charts, right? You have one chart that has the number of secrets in code over time, and that should be like a linear line downwards, right? And then you have another chart that is the number of secrets in a secrets manager like Doppler, and that should go up over time. So as the secrets get pulled out of code, they get pushed into a secrets manager. And that's really, that strong partnership is really, I think, how we excel today.
Got it. Got it. Do you have some best practices on the frequency of the secrets being changed, and maybe even the number of developers that should have access to a particular one?
Yeah, great question. So frequency of rotation, I would say, is somewhere between 2 weeks and a month is like a pretty healthy cadence there. And for what it's worth, if you choose 2 weeks or a month with a system like Doppler, it doesn't matter to you. Like the system's going to handle that all behind the scenes. It
Hmm
will only do a rotation when it's safe and in a way that doesn't cause any downtime. So you could put it as like 5 days if you wanted to, but I think 2 weeks is like a good healthy number. On who should have access to production, in my opinion, it should be the least amount of people possible. It goes back to this principle of least privileged access, right? So
hmm
who are the people that actually need production access? And if you have a DevOps team, I would say probably even a fraction of that DevOps team probably needs real production access. And then what you do is you should be able to break glass or give temporary access to the people who need it in the moment.
hmm Would you have would Doppler have multiple instances within the organization? Maybe one for the test environments, another one for pre-production verification, then production, or is it all in one and that's where you manage everything?
It's all in one. So the way to think about it is at the very high level, you have projects in Doppler, and you can mirror these with like repositories in Git. And then just like how in Git you have branches, you could have a branch for like development, you could have a branch for production. You have the same thing in Doppler called environments. And so let's just say you go into a project, you'll see like a Kanban board, you'll
Yeah,
see development, staging, production, and any other environments you want. And
got
then
it.
in those environments, you can have sets of secrets, which we call configs. And that's the basic structure. And what that allows is it allows you to see at a very high level all your secrets from development to production, or the sets of secrets you can have, not the individual secrets themselves, but the sets of secrets you can have across all the different stages of environments. And then you can tie up some really powerful automation. So for example, we have something called change requests, or the industry commonly calls them as pull requests. And what's really powerful about that is, let's just say a developer who does not have access to production needs to get a credential into production, a key into production. They can basically create a request, and someone who does have access to production can then approve it and pull it in. And that all happened in a very secure way where the developer who didn't have access to production never saw production secrets outside of
Got
that
it.
one they were adding.
Got it. I wonder, would the cybersecurity team use something like this, or would it just be for the development staff?
Great question. Usually, when we have customers use Doppler, it is typically engineering org wide. So we see three major sets of stakeholders. The people that lead the deals or lead the installation of Doppler are, we call them champions, and they are DevOps leaders. So they're the ones responsible for the critical infrastructure, and a lot of times even like the developer tool infrastructure as well. And then we also have security, and security and compliance will look at like the audit logs and make sure the policies are set up in the right way, which then the DevOps team implements. And then you have the everyday developer who's just working on features and new products, and they're using it in local development and staging it in production.
Got it. Brian, I wonder, what's your opinion about some of the emerging trends and technologies in the field of data security that organizations should be paying attention to in order to stay ahead of those potential threats?
So I think there's a big movement going on, and I think everyone can do their part to like helping make this happen. There's something called identity-based authentication. We're seeing it today with passwords. Like, you may have heard of something called pass keys. Like, you scan your face or you do a touch ID, and that grants you
Yeah.
access to whatever service you're using on Facebook or Netflix. And that exact same set of things is happening in security, or sorry, in companies with secrets. And it's really valuable because basically you don't have this thing that could get leaked. It's just an
Hmm.
identity. And so the more that companies support identity-based authentication, the better and more secure they'll be. And I would say that's where Doppler's investing a lot of its time right now, is building out a very strong identity-based authentication story, and specifically doing it in a way that makes it very easy for everyone to adopt. Right. Typically, this stuff is pretty hard to set up, which is why there's pretty low adoption right now. Is it worth all the pain of setting up for these security benefits? And a lot of times the companies find that the answer is no. But our job, we see, is to make that super easy where it's an obvious yes.
Yeah.
Uh, and I would say that's one big area people can invest in. Outside of that, because that's more of a future case, like where the future's where the industry is going, have a secrets manager. Again, if you couldn't answer those three questions: where are all my secrets? Who has access to them? And can I stop a data breach? You guaranteed have a problem today. It's just a question of, are you going to solve it or not? And in my personal opinion, I think it's negligence if you don't solve it, because you're charged with protecting real people's data. It's not arbitrary data of gigabytes of data. It's real people's data like me and you. And so we're tasked with protecting it. And that doesn't mean you have to use Doppler, but just use something. There's tons of good tools out there. Doppler's, I would say, best in breed, but if you don't want Doppler, go use something. And then make sure you really follow least privilege access. Like, you really take that to heart. People who
Hmm.
should have access to secrets should not end up having access. And that is a thing I see all the time. Almost every company I have worked at has had like way over permissioning, where you could literally see anything you wanted to. And it just takes one person to like really spoil it for not just everyone in the company, but every user that uses that company or that product. So
Right.
it only takes one bad actor, one bad apple to really spoil the whole thing.
Yeah. And we are the weakest link, as I was mentioning early on the
Yes.
episode. Yeah. Thank you so much, Brian, for being on the show and putting the lights on secrets and these preventable data breaches that could have been managed by managing those secrets better. So thank you again for outlining all of that. And yeah, it was great to have you on the show.
It was amazing to be here. And I hope I didn't scare you all too much. And just to close out, I really do think solving this problem isn't that hard. With just a little bit of effort, even the largest of enterprises we work with get up and running very quickly. So it's not a problem that's going to take a year of your roadmap or even half of that, 6 months. You can do this very quickly, sub 1 month, if you really put the effort in. And for much smaller companies, we even see them get set up in like hours. It doesn't have to be hard.
And that's the key.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
exactly it. Make vegetables taste like candy, right? If you do that, everyone will be eating their vegetables.
Yeah. Great analogy. Thanks again, Brian. Have a good weekend ahead.